Good morning and welcome to How to Navigate Growing Pains in the Rapidly Evolving Electric Vehicle Value Chain. We'll get started very shortly here. If you would like, go ahead and introduce yourself in chat to the other attendees, and you guys can network and hang out for a little bit before we get started. Thanks so much. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to How to Navigate Growing Pains in the Rapidly Evolving Electric Vehicle Value Chain. We're going to let folks sign on here just a couple more minutes. We'll get started shortly. Thanks so much. Okay, folks, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Justin Breithart. He's going to tell you a little bit about SEIA and get us started today. Justin is Senior Program Manager at SEIA, Southeast Energy Efficiency Alliance. Take it away, Justin.
Thank you, Sarah. A little bit about SEIA. SEIA was founded in 2007, where we work to ensure decision makers have the knowledge, resources, and opportunities to use energy more efficiently. We advance equitable energy policy, support strong building energy codes, and work to expand access to energy efficient transportation options. Our goal is to optimize the use and impact of energy so that all people in the Southeast can live and work in healthy and resilient buildings, utilize clean and affordable transportation, and thrive in a robust and equitable economy. And thank you for joining us on our member-led webinar today. And a little bit about our speaker. Rekha Menon Varma is managing partner at Vertion, where she has brought business insights to the forefront in envisioning and executing the development of innovative risk, environment, social and governance, and market analytics service as software platforms. Rekha has extensive leadership and experience in the deployment of enterprise and supply chain risk programs, sustainability programs, CEO and board level reporting, and growth strategy assessments. Previously, she worked at Lyondell Chemical in multiple marketing, e-business, and engineering roles of increasing responsibility. Rekha received an MS from Auburn University and an MBA from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. She is the co-president of the Wharton Club of Atlanta, a board member of Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council, and a member of the 100+ Women Strong program at Auburn University Engineering. And we thank you for sharing her expertise today. And Rekha, the floor is yours. Rekha, you're muted.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Justin, for that wonderful introduction. It's a highly relevant topic at this point, EV value chain and its risks. So happy to delve into it. So next slide, Sarah. Next one. Just to give a very brief introduction as to who is Vertion. We are a data analytics company based in the southeast of US, in Atlanta, Georgia, and in Gainesville, Florida. We provide risk and market analytics in terms of via SaaS tools. It's a cloud-based risk platform for global value chains. It's a small team, but combined years of experience is 100+, and we have quite a bit of domain expertise in terms of enterprise risk, corporate strategy, supply chain analysis, as well as, of course, advanced analytics and data modeling. We are sector agnostic. Having said that, we have developed quite a bit of expertise in the industrial and automotive value chains. So EV is one of core focus areas for us. Next one. So I think we should put a little bit of a background and a context behind it before we get into the electric vehicle side of things. Automotive industry has seen quite a bit of volatility in the last couple of years. That's not only through the pandemic years, it's continuing on to 2022. It's we have seen major segment supply crunches such as semiconductors and resins, related operational disruption, which went, I think, estimated 60 billion to 200 billion type revenue losses, market share loss, plant shutdowns. We have seen commodity price hikes in Q3, Q4 of 2021. That's for aluminum, copper, and so on. And now energy price increases, as well as other issues that's coming through, most recent geopolitical conflict, including Russia and Ukraine. So it's been continuing, and in the meantime, there is a concurrent growth commitment for EVs, not only by the companies, but also at the country level. Next one. So here, this commitment has been made to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to decarbonize the transportation sector. So there is a strong motivation behind this, and very, very high targets, actually 40 to 60% of vehicle portfolio to be EVs in the next 10 to 15 years. And from a country perspective, US, China, European Union all have made strong commitments. The problem is that, it's still evolving in terms of the technologies, the processes, need for production overall. Partnerships are still forming, companies are still setting up structures, talents have to be developed in the context of talent shortage at this point. So for us as a risk and market analytics company, what we have seen from a trend perspective is that it's key to meeting expectations, risk identification and management, and market trend analysis. So if you look at these risks, it's not standing one at a time. We cannot look at just one of the risks. So we are proposing a comprehensive view of risks. And in this, at least 6 of these key risks coming from a financial risk perspective, to player concentration and raw material sourcing, to legal and ESG, and then this broader level at the country level, the geopolitical type of risks. So let's go deeper into this. At this point, what I would suggest is that if you have a question, please put it in the chat. As we go along, this discussion should be more organic, so don't wait for me to finish. If you have a question, yeah. ESG is environmental social governance. So any issues that's happening because of the value chain or EV growth in these areas. So yeah, please, thank you, Dave. You got me exactly. So any questions, please ask as we go along. And it's sort of a discussion forum. We will use these slides sort of a backdrop for that discussion. Sarah, next one, please. So financial risks, it's a key part of this whole assessment, because there are new companies coming into play, and there are major players who have had a huge impact on revenue and profitability last year. We assess a multitude of ratios in the financial spectrum and come up with understanding how is the company performing, is it having a financial stress, worst case scenario being company going bankrupt. In this case right here, we are showing 2 of the key profitability and leverage ratios. One is net profit margin. If you look at the first chart on the left, on the y-axis, and then you have the debt ratios in color. So you can see, there are companies in negative territory. If you look at the top 40 players in the battery cell and the OEM spectrum, the range is pretty high in a way. So there will be winners and losers. We should expect that in the coming years. The key will be, as you plan for infrastructure investments or partnering, this is a key risk to keep in mind. And I think the second question to ask is, if somebody has a profitability issue or a debt issue, where is the money going? And the right side, it shows the R&D expenses. It's an emerging market. Innovation gets core focus, so a lot of money is going into R&D expense. So the same people who in the left, like Fisker or Lucid, who had extremely negative profit margins, had also extremely high R&D expense to revenue ratios. And I think another interesting thing to note here is on the right side, the new companies are putting in as much money, revenue to R&D to revenue ratio, as the established companies. And you can see BYD, you can see Tesla, of course, we expected that, but some of the newer companies putting in as much money as the established players. So from a financial risk perspective, this is key to assess how, I think we should go beyond a credit check to assess in depth how they're performing, how their cash flow is, and if they have enough money to pay even the interest. So, and you should also think of not only the key players like the top 40 or top 100, but hundreds of suppliers or customers that's in the value chain ecosystem as well. Okay, let's get into the next risk. So location risks. There is a location concentration. If we think of the whole value chain, there is the raw material side of things, there is the processing of raw material, there's the battery cell production, and then the EV production, and then the infrastructure to deploy that EV. So at this upstream level, where when we look at raw materials, that's being sourced from Latin America, which is lithium, cobalt from Congo, Philippines and Indonesia processing it, China being one of the largest processors of lithium hydroxide, as well as battery cell production. So there is a location concentration issue, both from raw material perspective as well as from the battery cell perspective. So that first chart on the left, the battery cell player concentration, it's I think top 11 or 12 players, and you can see that that's China, and then South Korea with LG, Samsung, and SK Innovation, and then Japan. So there is a concentration, and on the right side you see in terms of a country risk rating. So this is a combined country risk rating. We take political stability, infrastructure, property rights, regulatory framework, all that, and that's from Economic Intelligence Unit. So you can see the regions, how the risks are coming up, as well as where the concentration is. So we should expect some form of geopolitical risk. So this is a core part of this whole value chain, this location concentration, which leads to the next slide. There is a leadership position because of that. And this is a good chart. This is the second report by Bloomberg last year around Q4 2021. They came out with this report. So in the first report, there was quite a bit of leading position for China. And their second report, they're coming to us that China is still leading. They have 80% of the battery cell manufacturing capacity today. And there is huge growth plans to 2 terawatt hours, which will be equivalent to supplying around 20 million electric vehicles. But they're coming to us that US is narrowing that gap. There is quite a bit of investments planned here. Policies are supporting it. There is focus on supply resilience. So you can see US is coming up number 2 in battery demand, as well as investments. There's also increased focus from the EU. So the EU is going also a little bit in the upstream fashion. Nordic countries investing in material processing. You have heard of Umicore and BASF, big material chemical players investing in that. So US is making quite a bit of effort in that as well. Whereas Asia, Indonesia, China, making much more forward integration plans as well. We should think of these are plans, these are investments, and as with any manufacturing sector, we need to think of there is an investment risk. How many investments will come to fruition? Where there'll be issues? Is the yield going to be according to plans? There is an investment risk in this case. And again, this concentration question can come up. The leading countries are still making that investment. So is that concentration going to be distributed, or is it going to become further concentrated? And then the third aspect will be the ESG part of it. When we are forming EV vehicles to reduce the carbon footprint, but what is the carbon footprint of that battery production or material processing? So these are the things to keep in mind. Okay, let's go to the next one and jump to the next type of risk. So we saw the raw material concentration risk and the location risk. Is there something? Yeah, legal. Is it legal or geopolitical first? Legal risk. So there are associated risks with this because of that concentration. And as I mentioned, it's an emerging market. So innovation is at the top of everybody's mind, and which can bring about a bunch of issues with IP related issues. And this is where the property rights become key between companies, the country frameworks, legal frameworks. And the issue is that if it comes up as a lawsuit, it's not only reputational damage and license to operate, it can have broader impacts in terms of your market share, your potential local communities getting impacted. So, and as an example, LG Chem and SK Innovation, 2 big Korean players, had a lawsuit going on in the last 2 years, which got settled, thankfully, last year. But if it hadn't been, SK's imports to the US would have been affected quite a bit. And SK was also planning a plant in Commerce, Georgia, so they could have been impacted. That's the picture of that plant, actually. So that could have been an impact for the local community or local investments as well. It's resolved with SK is, I think, supposed to pay around 1.8 billion to LG Innovation. So, but you can see the impact of a lawsuit or an IP related issue can bring about. And it's not only IP related lawsuits, and I'm sure we will see several other types of lawsuits as well. So legal events is something that we have to keep track of as to who has the license to operate and where. The other issue that I think we would see is compliance in terms of antitrust. So there's a lot of partnerships and collaborations now, very, very big players combining together. So the question would be, is there an antitrust and a competition issue? Are we going to see more compliance needs or sanctions from FCPA, DOJ, SEC, UK Bribery Act, things like that? So there is a potential for these types of violations. So we are keeping track of that. The other part is business ethics. When I say business ethics, this is where fraud, bribery, corruption, these types of activities can happen. So all these things, there is what should I say, a confluence. There is a compounding impact to this concentration of raw materials, concentration of locations, concentration of players, a new market with innovation. So all these things can bring about underlying issues in business ethics and fraud. So that's another thing that we'll have to keep track of, and we are keeping track of. The next one is geopolitical. So this is again another underlying risk. Because of this concentration, it brings about, we have to take a look at what's happening between countries and within the country. So political stability of a country. For example, Russia supplying nickel. If there is a conflict with that country, the price is going to shoot up. As we saw, the nickel price is going up in the last week. It went up so much so that I think the metal exchange had to stop trading for a bit. And now there is a question as to all these commitments to EV growth, how is it going to materialize? So that's something that we did not anticipate fully, but that's becoming a result of a business implication due to a political stability issue. The regulatory framework, and I think this is where EPA and some of the others would have comments, and different countries have different frameworks, so we'll have to keep track of that. Property rights, including intellectual property. So if you develop R&D and IP in a country, how much, what's your right to keep that confidential, to keep that as a trade know-how. Legal frameworks, national sentiments. This is where you do business with improve the national strength in the market in a way. So there are a bunch of things that can add on to the geopolitical risk frame. And I want to say a little bit here on the ESG come geopolitical aspect too. These materials, the ones that go into battery cells, cobalt, lithium, nickel, we've heard of this. There are quite a bit of geopolitical issues. Most of the lithium comes, as I mentioned, from Latin America, and there have been issues of civil unrest. Is it going to impact the indigenous people? Environmental issues in terms of environmental degradation, whether it's Philippines, Indonesia, or LA, and child labor issues. So most of the cobalt comes from DRC, and this is something that we know that could be an issue. Now the question is, if you consider limited availability, how much are corporations following this? That's something that we need to track. Now, where can it affect if there is a geopolitical issue? So, for example, US-China discussions in terms of tariff rates, in terms of trade, that can impact quite a bit of material, battery cell production and exports, availability of key raw materials, pricing, and now I think we are keeping track of sanctions and watch lists, because there's quite a bit of sanctions and watch lists between countries, and it's not only the countries; it can impact companies. And then there's something called PEP, which is politically exposed persons. So are you doing business with some of these entities that's in OFAC, which is the sanction watch list from the US? So that's quite a bit to process in a way. And there is a little bit of a lag in that impact that, so for example, there is a conflict, there is a sanction against that country, there is a sanction or watch list against a few people or companies. And so we will have to track or assess in terms of who is affected, who should you be doing business with or not. And so this will impact the mid to long-term planning. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Now, there is another underlying risk, which is ESG in the next slide. So here, as I mentioned, all three aspects of ESG, the environmental side of things, the social, and the governance. From an environmental perspective, the carbon footprint, the emissions of the value chain processes itself come into play. What's that? So that's something to keep in mind. The use of water, the recycling of lithium and other materials, all those things come under play here. From a social perspective, that's the safety of employees. Think of mining as a key starting point for all this. It's the safety of people. We have seen really bad stats with Vale and some of the others. So keeping track of the employees, contractors, safety, corruption and bribery acts, things like that will fall under this. And then the third part is the governance. And as I mentioned, there is the business ethics processes come into play. So it's not a nice to have thing, ESG. It's becoming law. Actually, US signed a law into looking at forced labor practices in supply chain due diligence. So it's not only whom you're sourcing from, they're saying we need to look at beyond that into the sub-tiers. EU is working on a similar directive, broader scale, and Germany has already come out with something in the last 6 months. So it's becoming a must-do action item than a nice to have. Here is my ESG score with different reporting agencies. It's not that. It's becoming an assessment, a due diligence, literally at the company level to different sub-tiers of the supply chain. And then I think in terms of the decarbonization commitments and the performance in these areas become a key goal for the investors as well. So in terms of a company's stock, a company's investability get called into question as well. So those are the main risks that I think we should look at in terms of EV value chain, and it's growing. So at this point, I would probably stop for a second and see if we have any questions. Okay, so we go into the next slide. So we talked about 6 types of risks: financial, location, geopolitical, ESG, legal, raw material concentration. And there are other risks in terms of innovation and technology. So when we think of research and development, 2% of the ideas probably get to an actual test sales and sales spectrum. So whatever technologies we are thinking of now, we don't know in 10 years which ones will actually go into production and into large scale production. So that's one type of thing that we have to keep in mind. But not all of this is bad news. There is good news in terms of companies are making huge investments, billions of dollars, and forming partnerships. So if we don't have the capability, they are going out to get it. So either you can acquire somebody upstream, or you can partner with somebody in terms of production of batteries, for example, or you can form a different entity. I think the Ford is planning to do that. So companies are taking multiple steps to, get more strength in this space. And keep in mind, it's a manufacturing industry. So just like the way we saw in semiconductors, it's going to take time. It's not going to be immediate. If we decide on something, if we need more investments, it's going to take two to 3 years to really put things greenfield expansions. And then companies are also expanding in terms of existing investments. Can we make it bigger based on the need that's going to come out in 10 years? So that's going to happen. And in this process, we're hoping, the price of battery cells will reduce. It will become more manageable. It will have safer materials inside that. It'll follow more of the, what should I say, better technologies, and train more talent and create more jobs. So there are good aspects to this, what's happening. Now, what's happening at the national level, will all this policy changes and commitment to support the industry, that is an added benefit at this point. It's this nascent level, and then Justin will mention some of that. And towards that, countries are forming, I would say, look into where are they in the value chain? Can we create more strengths in the other parts? So for example, Biden administration launched a 100-day survey into supply chain review. last year. And this was to look at, and EV was included in that, not only on the battery production side, but also around, I think, 30 plus upstream minerals. So that's, I think that's coming up, and some action plans out of that are coming up. In the meantime, funding or incentives are also coming up. EU already had one in 2020. I think they launched Critical Upstream Materials Action Plan. China is going other way. China is very strong in material processing, battery cell production. They're looking at forward integration. And you can see successes there, like BYD, a company in China who is fully integrated backwards. So that's another strong point, that if you have captive supply for all your requirements in-house, you're producing car, you're producing batteries, you're processing the raw material. So that kind of a captive upstream integration is something that people are looking at as well. So this is definitely good news. This will support, added on to this risk spectrum, and we need to probably look at what's happening in terms of the market itself. And I think we will see big shifts. As I mentioned, Ford planning to separate the EV side of things, or we will see big shifts. And we'll also see new players come up. And here we have seen some very interesting things that happen in terms of raising money. A couple of companies came into the market, stock market, before having any revenue. So that's, and they floated and generated cash out of the IPOs. And that's another interesting thing that we are seeing, quite different from the past. So we have new players, Fisker, Lucid, Rivian, all of them are new players. And I think there will be more new players in this field. And then there is the infrastructure side of things, that people who are working with battery recycling, charging stations. So there is that side of things, and we should see new players there as well. So there's no way one company or one country can be self-sufficient. So there will be need for more collaboration, more nearshoring, more onshoring if needed. All of it will be required. So going into the last slide. So one thought, living thought is, we are talking about millions of data points, millions of pieces of information that's coming together, whether it's at the material level, the company level, country level, or trade level. And this is impossible to handle manually. It's also that it's not a fixed set of information. It's changing every week. It's changing, and we are seeing business impact like the next week. So you need to get that on time. And then there is a need for consolidation. What I mean by that is, it's not enough to let finance people do the financial risks, or legal do the compliance risks. There's a need to bring it together in a way and say, because there is an interactive aspect to this, there's a compounding aspect to this. So that, again, I think automation can help quite a bit. And in the last few years, and I was talking to Sarah and Justin about this, even last 5 years, advances in technology to do this has been quite, interesting and impressive. And we are, of course, also leveraging that. We are enabling technology to do that. So we are a recipient of that, and this way of synthesizing it. And it's that synthesized view is what gives us enough insights to make a recommendation in terms of, do you need more inventory? Should you be doing business with this company? What's happening in terms of a particular region? Is there a natural disaster coming? And if so, which facilities will be affected? I mean, all these different types of questions, this risk awareness leading to insights, that insights leading to risk mitigation planning. And that's when you can meet your growth goals or have some competitive advantage in a way. If you do it and your competition doesn't do it, you have that advantage to keep market share or grow. So that's sort of our thought process. I think Justin had a couple of points to mention, and then we can go into Q&A.
Yes, thank you, Rekha, for your time and expertise today. This is very informative. Just wanted to share some overview on some federal policies. And so kind of as Rekha mentioned, like the battery applications, like right now, the Department of Energy has some grant opportunities to kind of identify opportunities for second life battery applications from electric vehicles. which is another piece of that supply chain. Additionally, SEIA did have a webinar on November 10th of last year around how to leverage federal opportunities into the Southeast, where we had some presentations from Atlas Public Policy, Green Lots, as well as the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation. And you can see that webinar as well as kind of a breakdown of the bipartisan infrastructure law in that archived recording, as well as the slides. And then also on February 24th, the White House released a statement where 7 federal agencies, including the Department of Energy and Transportation, released a supply chain reports, like kind of what policy actions are needed, who are those players that need to be engaged on strengthening the supply chain as it relates to electric transportation and batteries. And I believe Sarah has the link to that site for those on the webinar. They can kind of go and look at it from our, for their review later in the day. And so with that, before we move on to a more specific question, a Q&A, we would appreciate the participants to take some time and fill out a survey that Sarah will put the link in the chat. But we always look for feedback on our webinars, how we can improve, what you like, what can we improve, things like that. So if we could take a minute for you to fill out that survey, then we'll jump into the Q&A after that. All right. And now, I guess, Reka, I want to go ahead and start with one question as our participants kind of begin to type theirs. But the first question I want to ask is, we have quite a diverse group of stakeholders who kind of listened in today. And as states, local governments, the private sector, they kind of set their EV goals, their sustainability goals, and they're preparing for these additional funding opportunities, as well as other priorities from the Biden administration. How should they consider the EV supply chain risks that were discussed today when kind of working towards their respective goals?
So I think as part of these goals, they will have to choose their suppliers, their partners, the companies that they're going to work with. So that's the first step, would be to understand if they have some of these risks that I mentioned. And it cannot be static also, it has to be ongoing. So the first step will be to understand what are the existing risks, is there a potential for additional risks? In view of the fact that one of these could stop investments in that process. So you need to keep that in mind, that if something happens, you may not be able to continue. So that's one part of it. That's an extreme scenario. And the second part is, what is the market trend itself? Is there a trend to move away from a specific material? Is there a trend to bring about new technologies in battery cells? So to keep that trend in mind will be have that mid to long term view as well. So I would focus on both, actually, starting with the financial risks of these. Once you identify the suppliers and partners, to have that. And it's also for the customers, who are the local communities, what's happening, that part of it. Keep in mind these 3 facts: ongoing risks, potential, and then also what's happening with the market trends in terms of innovation and technology.
Thank you. Yeah, so and as we wait for more questions, I guess, so how can those in the audience kind of stay aware of these risks when they're not kind of involved in the day to day? How can they
So,
kind of stay aware of it as they deploy transportation, like the transportation electrification projects and infrastructure?
so what we have seen is, from our perspective, we are keeping track of these things based on what's published, what's in the public realm, what's coming out of the regulatory agencies, what's coming out of licensed data sources who will track all these things globally. So that's one way of doing it. And using that information, we are probably holding one of the largest risk content in this area. So the one idea will be to benefit stakeholders using this information. And the second part is industry associations. I think they are a great source of information, especially now. For example, I mentioned that forced labor issue. And industry associations are a great way of knowing that. Also, any policy changes that's coming up, any funding opportunities, anybody who's leader in specific areas, all that. So those are the three areas that we focus on, and I think SEIA stakeholders can benefit from that as well. Yeah, and if you have any additional questions, the audience, let us know. I mean, if you're looking for a specific area to see where that information can be obtained from.
Yeah, Reka, it looks like we have a question
Okay,
from Dave in the chat, if you see that.
let me see.
But so Dave said he has read that the Chinese housing market is over
Yes,
leveraged. Are there similar credit concerns associated with companies like BYD? And just
yeah.
for reference on those on the call, BYD is a electric bus manufacturer that has some facilities, I believe, in California.
Mhm.
Just for just so people are aware. But Reka, please.
Yes. Yeah, we are tracking BYD actually. And I think, Dave, that's a good question actually, because for the audience, real estate market in China, some of the large players such as Evergrande had big issues last year. They couldn't pay. So of the financial ratios that I mentioned, when you get to a stage where you cannot pay your interest, not your debt, not the capital portion of it, but you can't even pay the interest payments on that, then that starts showing significant financial difficulty. And eventually that will lead to bankruptcy proceedings. And real estate market, which was highly leveraged, is going through that. And that will we will see some impact in China growth in that case. But BYD, we haven't seen anything so far. It's floating in the US market as well, but it's in our list to keep track of. BYD, the other part is also that I think I showed their position. The headquarters is somewhere in the East Coast towards the Southeast. And they are one of the captive players, which means they do have the battery cell production, and they also have cars in the market. So next to Tesla, if you think of this as a big player in the EV market. Yeah, we haven't seen anything so far.
Thank you. As I guess as more questions come in, just another question. Do you have any thoughts on how stakeholders should coordinate with each other to mitigate these risks as much as possible throughout the supply chain? So from the manufacturer all the way down to the end user and maybe even the second life application. How should stakeholders kind of coordinate with each other?
Yes, I mean, we have seen some collaborations in terms of recycling batteries. So it's not only the manufacturers collaborating, so there's significant public-private partnerships that's coming up. There is also, I think in terms of the community itself, how much resources that you're using, how is the recycling process working? From that perspective, we are seeing some. And I think, Justin, we have had this discussion. I think managing expectations is key. We are promising something to the community, to the local entities. Can we match that? I think who is going to, so there will be a need to collaborate with the manufacturers. And then there will be also the dealer spectrum, can consumers enjoy this? Or is it going to be like Tesla? I think it catered to a specific market. And I think Lucid has the same issue. So is it going to be beneficial for everybody? And then the third aspect will be the community transport, a broader scale EV deployment. So I see significant collaboration between the manufacturers, the local governments, larger federal government support, and then also the recycling labs and some of the other support functions as well. Yeah, it's coming up, I think. And then, companies like us who are supporting what's going on, these underlying things, the information that's needed to make those decisions. So you will see companies like that would come up as well in this collaboration. And we are part of one of the automotive associations, specifically for this reason. I don't think we can do this alone as it's evolving.
Right. Thank you for that. And yes, managing expectations is
yes.
going to be really huge, I think, especially with an ever growing and maturing technology and industry.
Right.
I do want to give a little bit more time for any other questions from the audience.
Yes. Feel free to type in.
I guess, Rekha, before we hand it back over to Sarah, do you have any final words or thoughts that you would like to share with our participants today?
Yes. So we talked about the growth and this commitment to growth and what's going to happen in terms of risks. So one thing to keep in mind when you're looking at investments or projects would be, are there underlying risks in this investment decision, in this use of funding? So we will have to take probably a little bit of that angle in terms of, and for companies too, that as you form your strategic objectives, are there underlying risks in that? So sort of an integration of risk into that decision-making process, that's something that we would definitely propose. And then also to keep in mind that it's not one piece of information, but rather multiple points coming together. So when you consider investment, have sort of a section or questionnaire or any of that also. So that will be something to keep in mind. And third, of course, as Justin mentioned, keep track of the incentives. Try to take leverage, try to leverage that. So that will be the third part. And then collaboration perspective, we are looking forward to, as we are collaborating with SIA and we are collaborating with automotive companies and associations, this information base is going to grow. So leverage that. That content has been already collected and processed and people are using it. So if you're making an investment decision, look to associations. They have quite a bit of information. Look to innovative companies, smaller firms or larger, and Vertion being one of them. And look to other companies, as partners. So all three of it. And then I think we will see changes. Next quarter, if Justin and I do the same webinar, I think we will have probably quite a bit of different perspective to bring in. And we don't know what's going to happen. Hopefully no more conflicts between countries. But I think in summer, if we do this, we will see probably quite a bit of natural disasters because China has, Asia has quite a bit of typhoons and other issues, whereas we will start seeing hurricanes here. So all these locations that we mentioned in the Southeast, where we have quite a bit of investments, in Asia, in Latin America. So we will have that entire discussion, which we didn't do today. How is this impacting? Because that will affect your insurance, that will affect your property damage issues. So where are these plants or facilities and what's going to happen? So I think it's going to be a very changing picture. I think we would see more technologies come out. Maybe people are already starting to talk about alternates for cobalt because of the toxicity and other things, or manganese or other things. So we will see quite a bit of a different picture. In the meantime, you have to make plans to commit to a move to this, even with all these things. But I think the more aware you are, the better you'll be able to counter it. whether we decide to accept it or manage it or mitigate it. So that's my recommendation. And then in conjunction, I think we'll have to keep track of market trends, even what big players like Ford, GM, VW, Volvo, Toyota, I mean, the big players are doing, and then the newer pure play EVs, Rivians and Teslas, and what are they doing? So I think in both of these aspects, I think if you're planning investments, you have to watch on these. And if you didn't get to ask a question, I'm sure Sarah will mention that you can email Justin and I, and we'll be happy to answer.
Yes. Thank you, Rekha. We really appreciate your time and expertise on this. This was very insightful. And with that, I'll turn it over to Sarah.
Yeah, thank you, Sia, and Justin and Sarah. It's been great fun working together.
Thank you, Rekha and Justin, and thank you to everybody for attending today. We will be releasing a recording and the slide deck from today's presentation to everybody who registered, and we'll also include in that email both Justin and Rekha's contact information. You guys are also welcome to pop that in chat if you want to. I'm also going to do a last push here for our survey. Please let us know how we did today. And I'm going to share my screen really quickly. Please let us know how we did today on the webinar. We always welcome your feedback so we know what we can do better in the future, or what you like or what you don't like. Also, a note here to sign up for email updates if you want to hear more about what's coming up in terms of webinars, virtual events, and also live in-person events, including our Southeast Energy Summit, which is coming back October of this year. You can sign up for email updates at that link. And then if you are not currently a member and are interested in membership at SIA, please check out our page there, and the contact for that is Pamela Fan. She's our Director of Membership and Diversity Integration. And with that, we are concluded for today. Thank you guys again for participating and joining us this morning. We look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah and Justin.
Thank you.
Bye, Rekha. Thanks.
Bye.